There's a moment every holiday where you feel guilty for wanting more money, and you don't know why. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It slips in quietly, almost politely, like a thought you weren't supposed to notice. You're surrounded by family, food, warmth, gratitude, and somehow the desire for more ease, more control, more security feels wrong. Not irresponsible, not unrealistic, wrong. Like a moral misstep you need to correct internally before anyone else can sense it. Your body reacts before your thoughts catch up. A tightening in the chest, a shallow breath you didn't choose, a reflex to justify yourself to no one. Because even letting the desire linger feels like crossing an invisible line, especially on days like this. Days built around appreciation, days where contentment is expected and dissatisfaction feels rude, where wanting more sounds like an accusation against what you already have. So you intercept the desire early. You shrink it before it fully forms. You downgrade it into something more acceptable. You tell yourself you're fine. You remind yourself to be grateful. You compare down. You list reasons you shouldn't complain. And for a moment, the guilt quiets. The nervous system relaxes slightly. But the tension never fully leaves. It stays underneath the conversation, underneath the smiles, underneath the rituals. Because the discomfort isn't about money. It's about permission. It's about who you're allowed to be while wanting it. Wanting more immediately puts you at odds with the version of yourself that learned how to stay safe. And that conflict is older than your paycheck, older than your career, older than your adult reasoning. This didn't start with ambition. It started when money wasn't numbers yet, when money was tone, mood, silence. You learned what money meant by watching what happened when it entered the room. You watched faces change. You watched conversations shorten. You watched stress rise without explanation. You noticed which questions caused tension and which ones shut things down. In some homes, wanting more money meant causing arguments. In others, it meant being selfish. In others, it meant becoming like someone you were warned never to be. So your brain took notes, not logically, emotionally. Before you ever earned anything, you learned that financial desire wasn't neutral. It carried consequences, emotional consequences, relational consequences, consequences that threatened belonging. So you adapted, quietly. You learned how much wanting was tolerated, how visible it could be without backlash, how quickly it needed to be softened, justified, or dismissed as a joke. You learned which desires were safe to express and which ones created discomfort. That rule didn't expire when you grew up. It didn't disappear when you became capable or educated. It followed you into adulthood, hiding inside your financial decisions, shaping your limits while you told yourself you were being responsible. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. That guilt you feel isn't a belief system. It isn't a value you consciously chose. It's a nervous system response. When the thought of more money appears, your body reacts instantly. Tight chest, heat, a subtle urge to retreat. That's not morality. That's threat detection. Your brain learned early that wanting more led to emotional cost, conflict, withdrawal, judgment. So now it flags more as unsafe. And the closer you are to the environments where that learning happened, the louder the signal becomes. Family proximity, old roles, familiar dynamics. On days like this, the alarm is hypersensitive. Your system prioritizes harmony over expansion, belonging over growth, safety over possibility. Guilt shows up fast because it works fast. It shuts the desire down before it can destabilize anything. And because the relief is immediate, your brain learns that guilt is useful, protective, necessary, which creates a split you rarely name. There are two versions of you operating simultaneously. One wants relief, space, options, less pressure. The other is loyal to an older identity that survived by not wanting too much. That version learned how to be easy, appreciative, low maintenance, not a problem. That version was praised for coping, rewarded for shrinking, loved for not asking. So when financial desire shows up now, it doesn't feel like growth. It feels like betrayal. Betrayal of family values. Betrayal of the role you played well. Betrayal of the version of you that kept the peace. So you hesitate. You second guess. You soften the want. You tell yourself it's unnecessary. You postpone it into later, which quietly means never. Because becoming financially expansive would require becoming someone unfamiliar. Someone who might disrupt emotional balance. Someone who might no longer be predictable. And your brain would rather cap your income than risk destabilizing your place in the tribe. This is where the mechanics lock in. Loss aversion leads the system. Your brain weighs the potential emotional loss of wanting more. Judgment, disapproval, conflict, far heavier than any financial upside. Present bias reinforces it. The short-term relief of shrinking your desire feels safer than the long-term discomfort of expansion. Guilt loops complete the circuit. You imagine more money, guilt appears. You pull back, relief follows, and that relief trains the pattern. Neural pathways thicken around this sequence. Want, feel wrong. Retreat, calm returns. Repeat. Over time, money dysmorphia sets in. Your internal ruler for enough gets distorted because it was calibrated in an environment where desire created tension. So your ceiling feels reasonable, ethical, mature. It doesn't feel like fear. It feels like character. And once this loop is installed, it runs automatically. Every opportunity gets filtered through it. Every decision passes through guilt before logic ever arrives. You hesitate without realizing why. You understate what you want. You delay and call it patience. You tell yourself you're being grounded, responsible, realistic. Each time you choose emotional comfort over financial expansion, the ceiling tightens a little more. Your identity begins to defend it. You judge people who want more. You label them greedy, excessive, stressful. That judgment isn't random. It's protective. Because if wanting more is dangerous, then not wanting it becomes virtue. And that's how the loop hides in plain sight, by convincing you that the very thing limiting you is actually proof that you're a good person. And here's the part that doesn't feel good to sit with. If the guilt shows up automatically, if the retreat feels relieving, if staying below the line feels virtuous, then the ceiling isn't accidental. It's being actively protected, not by fear of failure, but by fear of becoming someone who no longer fits the story you were trained to survive inside. Which means every time you tell yourself you're just being grateful, just being realistic, just being a good person, you might actually be obeying an old rule that was never designed for the life you're living now. And the most unsettling part isn't that guilt stops you from having more money. It's that it convinces you that stopping yourself is who you are.